practice well-being, and act compassionately. Dr. Crosby graduated from West Point, completed Ranger School, and served in the U.S. Army as an infantry officer for 6 years, including service in Desert Storm. He travels extensively and has sailed around the world with Semester at Sea. He teaches leadership and well-being programs to a variety of organizations, including the United Nations, via the Peace on Purpose program. But in short, Dr. Crosby considers himself an activist for human flourishing. Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
And I wanted to start with good evening, America's County, but I heard that might cause some ruffled feathers because there's so many others here. But we can all agree that we're from counties in America, right? All right. And just curious, who lives in the best county? Raise your hand. All right. Well, that's a good way to start. And we've had a wonderful, wonderful time so far this evening. Would you agree?
Yes.
Wonderful food and everything. Thanks everyone. Mike said at the outset that if you look around the country today, or something to this effect, the hardest question of our time is simple. Can we cross the distance between us, across different backgrounds, different politics, different generations? Can we build bridges and recognize those strangers as neighbors? Tonight's about the practical art of bridge building. Why we do it, how simple it can be, and how it transforms strangers into neighbors. Bridges aren't built from the stage, right? So they're built person to person, table to table, 250 tables if you will. So let's start with people sitting right around you. Look to someone you haven't met before, someone you didn't come with, and I want you to answer one question, which is similar to the ones we had earlier. But what I want to know is, what is one thing you love about the foundation and the work it contributes to? So turn to a stranger, someone you don't know. I'll give you 30 seconds. I'll start a timer. What is one thing you love about the foundation and the work it contributes to?
Yeah.
I'll ask a different question. When he's done, what are we doing?
He asked me that, and I was going to ask both of you. Who wants to do the close? I mean, it's just thank you again.
Doesn't matter to me. Mike, do you want to go through the close? You want
When
to
he's
do it?
done,
Doesn't matter to me.
or he's the close, or just thank you for the foundation. Yeah, thank Dr. Crosby and thank you. That'd be great.
It's good.
All right, thank you. Listen to the hum in the room. That's connection in real time. And that's what tonight is about. That's the heartbeat, really, of what's going on. So that we can recognize between the different backgrounds, different stories, and different reasons for caring, different reasons and paths for how we got into this room tonight, that when we think about it, it's all about shared purpose. There are a lot of differences, but there's something that we share. And that something is love for the work being done. So we're standing here in the quiet strength of the Alleghenies, and this region knows what it means to show up for each other. From the devastating floods, someone shared at the bottle works that I was at today, you know, the 3 devastating floods, and she told me about those stories, and to the enduring legacy of Flight 93. So we know that you all know what resilience looks like, and what happens when ordinary people step up to serve strangers. And that's a good place to begin tonight. I was asked by Angie to talk tonight about unity and bridge building and compassion, things that I love to talk about. And I've been practicing, or at least trying to practice for most of my life, this idea of how we can cross the distance between us. When I was in high school, I was 17 and I wanted to run for a statewide office. And I had to come up, like any politician, with a slogan. And mine was, build a bridge to a better Illinois Association of Student Councils. So it was an amazing evening. I got up to speak after someone who spoke really, really well. I mean, I wanted to vote for him. He sounded like Martin Luther King, and I get up there with my note cards, but my idea of this bridge, and maybe I didn't really have it fully developed then, but now I can talk a little bit more about it because much of my life has been about how can we cross that distance between us. Different backgrounds, different generations, different beliefs, different politics, different cultures, different experiences. So can we cross that distance, meet somewhere in the middle, and recognize a neighbor? What most people know about me, and Mike shared it earlier, that I graduated from the United States Military Academy. But what you may not know is that some of the lessons that I learned, some of the harder lessons I learned, were after I graduated from West Point. I learned the hard way the truth of that ancient African proverb that if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. I was a young second lieutenant stationed in Germany. It was 1989, right before the wall came down, and my platoon entered a very demanding Special Forces group, 10th Special Forces group, ran a platoon conference training course. It was in the southern part of Germany, the Bavarian Alps, so mountainous like here and cold, and we had to do something like Survivor with rifles. Right? So we had to do land navigation and mountaineering, river crossings, very little sleep, not much food, and we had competition against other platoons. And naturally, I had chosen some of my strongest, fastest soldiers to come along with us. And during one timed event, we were moving along pretty good. We were moving through the mountains, but one soldier started falling behind. My legs are getting heavy, he was saying. My lungs are burning. And we tried to encourage him. We stuck with him as long as we could, but he started like drooling. It looked like he was gonna vomit. He was just having a really rough time. And one of my sergeants, Sergeant Weigel, he put his arm around him and he was trying to help him along, trying to keep him moving. And we tried some cadences, left, 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 right, left. And then another sergeant got along next to him and we tried some more cadences. You can run to the sun. But it just wasn't quite working. And my faster soldiers, they wanted to push ahead. So Alceda said, LT, come on, we can go faster. And we kept going, trying to help the slower soldier. And then another sergeant, I guess he was a specialist, came up to me and said kind of the same thing. Come on, LT, we can go further. We can go faster. And I relented. I let the group split apart. Some sergeants stayed and helped the slower ones, but I went with the faster group. And we crossed the finish line, but we didn't cross it together. And we lost points because of that. And so what I remember now, more than 30 years later, is that when I ask myself, can we cross the distance? I remember that African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. Because that day taught me an unforgettable lesson. It doesn't matter how fast the front runners sprint off if the unit breaks apart on the climb. True strength is measured in how everyone comes together to make the journey. Because sometimes going together means the strongest people have to slow down and offer a little help to carry someone else. That's unity. Not moving at the same speed, not everyone having the same strengths, but everyone deciding we finish together. And years later, my work took me a long way from those mountains in Germany. It was just this May, I was in Cameroon, and like he said, I get to do some work with the United Nations staff. We teach the Peace on Purpose program, and it's a well-being program that's day-long. We were in a remote part of Cameroon, and we expected about 50 UN staff to show up that day. We have a small team, 4 of us, and 2 of us, Aline and I, we lead the workshop, and we were out front greeting people that morning. And Aline speaks French, she's from Rwanda, and so she was greeting them in French, and I was doing it the American way, you know. Hi, my name is Joseph. May I have your name so I can check it off on this list? And beautiful groups of people, different groups, they were arriving at different times. And one lady, she came on in this like beautifully patterned, traditional patterned dress with puffs on the shoulder. It was red and white. And she stood there looking in front of me. And I said, hi, I'm Joseph. May I have your name? And she said, we speak French in Cameroon. Okay. Message received. I understand. At that moment, there was distance between us. Language, culture, backgrounds, all the assumptions people make about others before they get a chance to know one another. We were strangers. But throughout that morning, we all practiced together. We talked about neuroscience, we talked about stress and well-being and presence, and we did something deceptively simple, an exercise that we call mindful listening. And in that exercise, you pair up, and one person's sharing their thoughts, and the other person is silent, not trying to think of the next best thing to say, not trying to interject or ask questions, just listening, giving that person the full gift of your attention. And so we went through those practices, and then we come to lunch and we take a group photograph, and it turned out that lady was standing right next to me, and she pulled me aside and she shared with me something really kind of close to her heart. The people in her village do a healing ceremony that includes some of the things that we were sharing that day. And so I was really happy that now that distance had been closed, right? And we walked together towards lunch, arm in arm. So think about that. A few hours earlier, we speak French in Cameroon. Now we're walking together, arm in arm, back to lunch. What changed? Not our nationality, not our language. The quality of our tension changed. We had made room for one another. We made it to the bridge. And somewhere between that registration point and the walk to lunch, a stranger became a neighbor. And that's why I believe listening isn't passive. These conversations at 250 tables, listening is civic action. Listening says there's room for your story here. You don't have to become me for me to care about you. You belong here. Bridge building rarely believes with, how can I change your mind? Bridge building starts with a much better question. What have you lived that I need to understand? Imagine what could happen if we asked that question more often. At home, at the dinner table, at work, in our communities, across political differences. When you meet a stranger, ask yourself, can we cross the distance between us? Remember, be curious and reflect. What have you lived that I need to understand? That's a bridge building question. That's how you cross the distance. And that's how strangers become neighbors. And sometimes bridge building is much less complicated. Sometimes you just show up. It was December 28th, 2008, and I had recently met the love of my life, Kathleen Elwood. I call her Sunshine. Sunshine would become my future bride, and somehow I convinced her to move, instead of to Colorado like her original plan was, to Clarion, Pennsylvania. So we had to pack up all of her life from Latrobe, and we put in all the boxes, the furniture, the dryer. We'd called people to help us pack on and unpack on both ends. But you know, a lifetime packed in one truck. And of course, those kinds of things take a little longer than you expect them to. And so as we got the truck loaded, it started snowing, December 28th. The roads from Latrobe to Clarion, supposed to be about a 2-hour drive, took twice as long. It was harrowing, white knuckle driving, snow blindly, you know, just the roads were horrible and icy covered. We've all been there, right? Yeah. So we get to the house, the new rental place. We look at each other. We made it. And we open the door to the truck and we step out into 2 feet of fresh snow. Oh boy. Well, we texted those folks that, you know, had earlier said that they would help us, but 5 had become 10 p.m. So you can imagine, thoughts and prayers, brother. Sending positive vibes your way, right? So we started unloading. It was cold, we were tired. And does anybody get snippy when they're tired? Yeah, right? We were at a wedding the other day, and a priest shared that he and his wife were driving along, and they'd had a little argument, a little tiff, and they were a little snippy, and so they had gotten silent, gotten really quiet in the car. They were driving along, and they're out in the country up between Erie and Clarion, and they come across a field, and in that field they saw 2 donkeys in the field, and the priest gets a smart idea. Are those relatives of yours? And the wife, without missing a beat, yes, my in-laws. Right? So we weren't quite that bad, but we were getting tired. And then Dr. Bob Gervin, 70 years old, shows up. Sometimes Sunshine will joke that he saved the divorce that night. But Bob, he didn't give us a motivational speech. He put on his gloves, climbed into the truck, and when something got heavy, he'd say, which end should I lift? Which end can I take? The washer, which end can I lift? The dryer, which end can I lift? Furniture, which end can I lift? And he stayed until the work was finished because we had to turn the truck in by midnight. And so I don't remember everything Bob carried that night, but I remember how he made me feel. He never gave a lecture about community, but he demonstrated one. He taught me something I've carried ever since. When someone is struggling with something heavy, you can go the extra mile, but you don't have to carry the whole thing. You can simply ask, which end can I lift? So, those experiences taught me different ways to answer the question, can we cross the distance between us? Yes, we can, when we go together, when we listen to understand, when we ask and lift one end. And that's why the work of the Community Foundation for the Alleghenies is so vital. And I like those words, community and foundation. So a question for all of the engineers in the house. If you wanted to see how tall a building is going to be, and you can't look at the plans or ask anyone, what's the best way to find out in the first part of construction? Think about it, the foundation, right? Look at how deeply they're digging the foundation. The deeper and stronger the foundation, the taller the building can rise, and the more flexible it is when challenges come the building's way. And community reminds us that none of us flourishes entirely alone. We need each other to thrive. You build bridges between generosity and possibility, between organizations that can accomplish far more together than ever could alone, between someone who wants to help and someone who needs help, between an idea and the resources that allow it to become real, between people who may not agree about everything, but still care deeply about this place. That's especially important now, because our culture has become remarkably good at reminding us of what divides us. Our politics, our identities, our beliefs, our backgrounds, our skin color. Our screens can deliver outrage, right? 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Division does get attention, and connection requires intention. Unity doesn't require sameness. We don't have to think alike to care about one another. We don't have to vote alike to help a neighbor. We don't need identical stories to listen. We don't even need the same language to walk arm in arm to lunch. We simply have to decide. The person on the other side is a human being worth reaching. And I've realized something about bridges. The bridge is not the destination. The neighbor on the other side is. We build bridges so we can reach one another. We reach one another so strangers can become neighbors, and neighbors create places where people belong. And for me, that requires something just a little deeper than niceness. It requires love. Love, not as sentimentality, but love as a disciplined way of showing up. Love that listens, love can disagree, love can tell a difficult truth with compassion. Love can confront injustice, and love can hold someone accountable without denying their humanity. There are two words I try to live by: be love. Not merely feel love, but be love. Be love when I listen, be love when I disagree, be love when somebody is hurting. Be love. Of course, that's easier to say from the stage than when someone's getting on your last nerve. Right? So, I'm going to give you one small practice. Something you can do when that person gets on your last nerve. Something you can do when you get that email that makes you want to smash something. Earlier, in response to the question, what's the best advice, someone said to choose how you respond instead of how you react. Right? So, let's do this together. Put both feet flat on the floor. Sit up straight like you're in the military sitting at attention. And we're going to take 3 nice long inhales and longer exhales together. So take a nice long slow breath in. Exhale. And another in. And exhale longer. And one more. In and out. And after you do that, often there's a change in state. And you can ask yourself, what's important now? Not what was going on yesterday, or not what's going on in my inbox for tomorrow. What's important now? The next question is, who do I choose to be in this moment? And for me, you can choose any value you like, but I like to think, be love. And one final question, what's the next neighborly action? Maybe it's to listen better, maybe it's apologizing, maybe it's putting away your phone and giving someone your full attention. Maybe it's making a repair. Maybe it's telling the truth, with compassion. Maybe it's simply saying, which end can I lift? So we don't have to wait until we feel perfectly loving to act with love. We notice what we're feeling, we remember what's important, and then we choose how we're going to show up. One action, one interaction at a time. One neighborly moment at a time. Because every genuine act of love says, you belong here. And perhaps one of the greatest gifts we can give another human being is the belief that there's room for me, room that my story matters, my contribution matters, my future matters. I belong here. Because when people believe they belong, they can begin to believe that they can contribute. And when people contribute, communities flourish. And that brings me back to why we're here, Founders Day. So looking around this room, I don't simply see donors and business owners and members of the nonprofit committees and organizations and volunteers, but I see something else. I see founders. Because a founder isn't just someone whose name appears on the cornerstone. A founder is anyone whose choices make it more possible for someone else to belong. Every scholarship, every grant, every volunteer hour, every networking introduction, every partnership, every act of generosity, every repair of trust, and every time you make room at the table, every time you turn toward a stranger and see a neighbor, every time you ask, which end can I lift? You're still founding this community again and again and again. And maybe the great question of contribution is simply, what makes it more possible for someone else? Because I was here. I mean, that example that you set, $188 million, congratulations, and more sweat equity, right? Regina was telling me in the back. You set an example not just for your community, but for other communities across the nation. Your community is going to share what's worked, and that's going to help another community to improve and grow so they can help people. So here's the charge I'll leave you with. Tomorrow, someone you meet will be carrying something heavy, and you may or may not know what it is. It might be a spouse, it might be a coworker, it might be a stranger, it might be someone whose politics baffle you. It could be someone whose story you've never heard. You don't have to solve their whole life or carry the whole load. Just remember Dr. Bob Gervin standing in that snowstorm and asked, which end can I live? Remember Cameroon and say, what have you lived that I need to understand? Remember those soldiers in Germany? We finished together. That's unity, not sameness, it's shared humanity, it's compassion and action, it's bridges across difference. Because communities aren't transformed only by extraordinary people doing extraordinary things, but by ordinary people who keep choosing over and over to lift one end. So, I was fortunate to win that election back in high school, but primarily because all of my friends were in the background campaigning really hard for me. I didn't know about it then, but my friends were my strong foundation. So tonight, as we continue to celebrate everything that you've accomplished, let's remember, we still need bridges, but we don't build bridges because bridges matter. We build bridges so we can reach resources, and we are each other's resource. So maybe the work in front of us is simpler than we think. I ask you all, can we cross the distance? There we go. Can we cross the distance? Yes. All right. And so together, let's give back. Let's move ahead, one neighborly moment at a time. And wherever you go tomorrow, make it a good moment. Thank you.